Computer Technologies in 1995 and BE Honors Electrical Engineering in 1987. He has served the university in various capacities as head of the department and several other positions. Currently, Sir is Dean, Faculty of Computer Applications of the university and convener Board of Studies for Computer Science and Information Technology. As convener, Sir has introduced several new courses at a very early stage in the curriculum. Apart from this, he has published 40 international publications in reputed journals indexed by Web of Science and other reputed indexes. His papers have a high number of citations, totaling to more than 200. Professor C.P. Gupta is on editorial board of several international journals, including SCI Indexed International Journal of Information Security and Privacy, International Journal of Network Security, etc. Sir has been General Chair for several international conferences, including International Conference on Cybersecurity, International Conference on Computers and Management. His current research interests are in the area of information security and privacy, social network analysis, and network protocols. So, apart from this formal introduction, informally, many industrialists or people working in industry are his students, including me myself. So, he needs no introduction. Most of us are aware who he is. So I now hand over the dais to him for his expert talk of this session. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And now it's over to you, sir.
Okay. So thank you, Shyam Sundar, for such a nice and lengthy introduction of mine. Thank you very much for me. So not wasting much of the time, let me just start the session immediately. Okay. Few days back, Pankaj asked me to deliver this talk, and I thought today, being the medical field being so much challenged, this is a very timely discussion on emerging medical technologies 2020. This lecture, quite you might have heard actually. I have delivered this lecture in the past also, so few of you might have listened to this lecture. But today, there are certain changes which I have made to this lecture, in the sense that because the theme of the course is on applications of IoT for health applications, I have tried to incorporate, and I'll be putting more emphasis on new medical technologies which are emerging. And which have become really relevant due to COVID pandemic, which has mandated that there are two very, very important aspects which we have to understand in the context of the present pandemic. The one is that now the healthcare requires less and less contact. So the healthcare needs to be such that we can avoid physical contact of the patient and the caretakers. That is number one aspect. The number two aspect is the development of vaccines and medicines. Now, COVID-19, fortunately or unfortunately, you can, whatever way you can think of, is that COVID-19 has forced, or the vaccine for COVID-19 was developed in record time. Now, such developments require real new technologies to be developed, so that the vaccines can be developed, tested, modified, and so everything possible. Otherwise, in a shorter duration. Earlier, the vaccine development of vaccine used to be some 10 years to 12 years program. Now, with this pandemic, actually, that much time is not available because the entire world has come to a halt. So, the overall available time and the total time required for development of vaccines needs to be shortened significantly, not marginally, but significantly. And for that reason, we require some new technologies. So I'll be discussing few of these technologies. And then the second aspect of this lecture will focus on the requirement of faster computing technologies and faster data analysis techniques, which efficient data analysis techniques also. So this lecture is basically a mixture of all these things, and here I'll be focusing not on development, means how to implement these technologies, but just for the purpose of those who are interested in carrying out the research. This will give them an exposure of the new technologies which are happening and which needs to be explored for a better world in the present circumstances. Okay, so what has happened is actually United Nations has listed 22 global issues which range from climate change. Climate change is basically a group of challenges. Actually, it's not a single challenge, but it's a group of challenges which require clean energy, zero emission transport, and so on and so forth. So this is a very, very important aspect. Now, sometimes you may feel that in the context of medicine, means healthcare, how these are important, because healthcare is one field which generates a lot of waste, and ultimately that waste is also responsible for climate change. So we need to understand it with that aspect. Then affordable healthcare, this is our main focus, and I'll be putting some more insight into this aspect, that how we can have the affordable healthcare. Food security, that is very, very important challenge across the world, because climate change has affected the food security negatively. So we'll see. Then safe drinking water, again, this is again related to the climate change, because as the climate change will happen, availability of drinking water may get affected. So ultimately, what we require is to provide safe drinking water to every citizen globally. So that is also equally important aspect. Then housing for all, we all know in India, housing is a very, very big problem. In fact, even say drinking water is also a very big problem in India. So these all issues are very much relevant in the context of India also. And global issues also, these are 22 global issues which the UN has identified, and which the UN wants the people to solve few of these issues actually. So any work on climate change, affordable healthcare, food security, safe drinking water, housing, everything gets support from UN, provided you have some viable project, maybe in the form of a research or development of some prototype or some modeling, everything. So UN provides you substantial grants for that aspect also. Okay, and then what the UN has also specified what they call as sustainable development goals. So in that context, actually, there are multiple goals, and these goals, the UN intends to achieve these goals by 2030. So what they call it is that where should we be in 2030? So the first and foremost emphasis is on poverty. So we want to eliminate and completely make the world free from poverty. Zero hunger. Now poverty and hunger, they are related to each other. Then good health and well-being. Now here healthcare is part of this actually. Okay. So well-being is basically the health care, that the people will have good health so that they'll require less health care. That is the aspect. Quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy. So there are a lot of these challenges actually, and UN has specified and aims to achieve these goals by 2030. Now each of these goals require development of new technologies, and that is where these goals are important, that we need to understand these goals, explore them for better understanding, and then identify those technologies which will be required to achieve these goals. Say zero hunger. Now hunger, basically that is related to development of increasing the yield from the current cultivation procedures. So you require better seeds, then less fertilizer is required so that we can bring down the cost of agriculture and so on and so forth. And all our the climate action, responsible consumption and production, and these are very, very important aspects. And then what we require is the challenges. We need to understand what are the challenges in achieving these goals. And 2020 has been a bad year in that it has really caused some new issues. It has forced upon, and so COVID-19 has caused biggest disruption since the recorded history. And the challenge is basically response to every aspects of human life. Health, we are all aware. Those who have fallen victim to COVID-19, they understand it better. Then the another aspect which has been affected badly is the education and transport. Now, if you see the transport in particular, the city transport or the air the transport, everything has a very high degree of contact. So what we require is we require to bring down these contacts. And then education, because of the fear of students getting infected, globally schools have been closed down. And once you close the schools, the education is the biggest victim. And we are all very sensible. We are all aware of these ill impacts of COVID-19 on education. The colleges are closed for last 1 year. The schools are closed. And the fear is that how to bring these students back to school and then bring them at par with the rest of the society. Okay. Now, no challenge can be thought of in isolation to each other. In isolation, they have some interdependence actually, and that is where we as academicians need to understand the challenges. That suppose you solve one problem, maybe it creates another problem, or it addresses the other issue of it affects the other issue adversely. So what we need to understand is that none of the challenges can be addressed in isolation of other challenges. So we have to think in an integrated way. That is the very, very important aspect. Say healthcare. Now, if you see COVID-19 healthcare has generated the highest, very large amount of bio-based, you can call it, or the medical waste, you can call it, but and a large portion of this is non-biodegradable. Say particularly the PPE kits. The syringes which are being used to administer injections, the other drug delivery systems like pipes and all other aspects. Okay, so these will affect the climate change. So that's what the relationship between the climate change and COVID-19 can be thought of. So climate change affects food security, biodiversity, water, agriculture, and wildlife, everything. So climate change is the biggest challenge, I can call it. Now, the problem is that it's not that particularly for climate change technologies are not available. Yes, they are available. But what is happening is reduction in carbon emission affects developing nations negatively, at least in the short run, because it will increase the cost of energy, the transportation, and these developing nations are in no position. They are in no position to afford or give up the current technologies and the current modes of energy generation, the main component of which is the coal. Okay, and for transportation, you have the fossil fuels, so we cannot give up them directly or overnight. No developing nation can throw it away. And so why it's happening? Because lack of access to cleaner technologies at affordable price is still a challenge for the developing nations. Because the rich nations, so-called rich nations, I'll call them, they are not ready to share the technologies easily. And because of that reason, what is happening is the developing world is continuing with energy generation based on coal, the coal-fired power stations, they have coal-fired boilers and so on and so forth. And then for transportation, most of these countries are still using fossil fuels, mainly the petroleum. Okay, and movement or migration to electric vehicles has not been that smooth, because the electric vehicles, cost of electric vehicles is very high, and industry is really affected, and they are not very keen to move to the newer platforms. And what happens is, once you address one issue, it causes new issues. I'll just give you an example. See, though we are saying that the per capita income is increasing, the number of hungry people in the world has increased over the last few years. Why it's happening? If the per capita income and the income levels are going up, why the number of hungry people is increasing? The reasons are slightly different. What is happening is, now as many as 1 in 9 people in the world go hungry each day and suffer from nutritional deficiencies as a result. Okay, now nutritional deficiencies basically becomes a big medical challenge. So it's a healthcare issue, because the person who is lacking on nutrition has a very high probability of meeting infection and other diseases. So that's a very serious issue actually. Now, just look at this. Food insecurity and famine are some of the biggest threats to the overall health of the human population, for the reasons, because food insecurity will cause the nutritional problems. Nutritional problems will cause make it prone to the infections and so on and so forth. Now, what happens? Just see. According to the World Food Program, countries with the highest level of food insecurity also have the highest outward migration of refugees. Now, so at the moment there is a food insecurity or food security problem, it will cause outward migration. Now, the moment it is outward migration, you can see in India we have migration from some of the states, and then we have these migratory population moving to big cities like Mumbai and Ahmedabad. And Mumbai, you can see they reside in very bad conditions, and particularly in slums, and there the sanitation levels are very poor, again making them exposing them to very high risk of medical issues. Now, so to address all these issues, World Economic Forum constituted a committee, and that committee submitted its report in 2020, November 2020, and it suggested 10 new technologies, that these will be the technologies which will be pursued by the world to address some of these issues. Now, few of these issues are economic in nature, and what is happening is, because they are economic in nature, the assumption is that once the economic levels go up, some of these issues get addressed. Say food insecurity, which is due to poverty, then healthcare issues to some extent get addressed, because these people improve their sanitation levels, so lowering the risk of infections. At the same time, they have access to the healthcare also. So that's how the overall health standards and economic standards are related to each other. Okay, and the purpose is the identified technologies are aimed at addressing global challenges identified by UN. As I told you, there are 17 global challenges which have been identified by the UN. So, having discussed the background of these technologies, now I come to these technologies, that what these technologies are really about. Now, this is a very, very important technology and directly related to the healthcare. That is the microneedles for painless injection and tests. Now, we have to understand why the necessity for this. See, a large number of people are afraid of taking medicines because of the pain induced by the injection. That is one aspect. The second aspect is, to inject a person, the person needs to be touched upon. Okay. Now, with COVID-19 fear, this physical contact people want to avoid. The another aspect is, in some cases, frequent pricking is required. Say people who are suffering from diabetes and required to be administered insulin on regular basis. Now for them it's a very, very painful procedure, very, very painful to get that injected on twice a day or thrice a day. And so that is a very, very serious issue actually for them. So what we require is, we require to develop some technologies which can provide you painless injections and tests. So what happens is, these microneedles are basically, they are attached to a syringe or a patch. Microneedles prevent pain by avoiding contact with nerve endings. See why this pain happens. Reason is, there are two aspects. One is the pain associated with the injection, and the second aspect is the pricking provides you a sufficient, the point where from where the infections can enter into your body. So both these aspects need to be taken into consideration. We need to avoid or we need to address both these issues. Okay, and why this pain happens, try to understand here. If you see, the pain typically 15 to 2000 microns in length and 1 to 100 microns wide, about the width of human hair. These microneedles penetrate the dead top layer of skin to reach into the second layer. See, our skin is not a single layer actually. It's a multiple layer. And the pain happens when your syringe touches the nerve endings, which are the last part of your skin. So the epidermis, consisting of viable cells and liquid known as the interstitial fluid. Okay. So you need to reach to this point also. But what happens is, we'll reach, but most do not reach or only barely touch the underlying dermis where the nerve endings lie. So what happens, because of this reason, one feels the pain. So with blood and lymph vessels and connective tissues. So this is the reason which causes pain. So what we do is, these microneedles basically, they avoid touching the nerve endings and administer the medicine directly. Now it has two impacts. One is avoidance of the pain. Frequent pricking is also not required. The third important aspect is that, because it will be putting the medicine where it is required, or where it is expected to be absorbed, you require very little quantity of medicine. So it it will reduce the chances of the side effects also. So that's how this technology is very, very important technology. So available for administering vaccines, and many more are in clinical trials for use in treating diabetes, cancer, and neuropathic pain. So in some cases, say particularly for vaccines, they are already in use, but for others, particularly diabetes, they are still in the clinical trials, and I hope by next year these will be put to use. They will be allowed to be used for the patients. And because these devices insert drugs directly into the epidermis or dermis, they deliver medicines much more efficiently than familiar transdermal patches, which rely on diffusion through the skin. So you require less quantity of medicine. Okay. Now, associated with this is the sun-powered chemistry. See how it happens actually. Just try to understand it. Now, we all know that light is a very big source of energy. Now, visible light can drive processes that convert carbon dioxide into common materials. Okay, we all know actually. So, the manufacture of many chemicals important to human health and comfort consumes fossil fuels, thereby contributing to extractive processes, carbon dioxide emissions, and climate change. And that is where this technology is significant. What it does is, basically, this technology, it employs sunlight to convert waste carbon dioxide into these needed chemicals. So carbon dioxide becomes a raw material. Then you have the sunlight available, and basically what happens, that sunlight converts this carbon dioxide into chemicals which are required for manufacture of medicines in particular. Okay, that's why this technology is related to the healthcare industry. Potentially reducing emissions in two ways: by using the unwanted gas as a raw material and sunlight, not fossil fuels, as the source of energy needed for the production. So sun-powered chemistry is very, very important for healthcare industry in that aspect. Okay, this process is becoming increasingly feasible thanks to advances in sunlight-activated catalysts or photo catalysts. So chemical engineers come here into play, that they need to develop better catalysts which can convert carbon dioxide in the presence of sunlight into the desired chemicals. So in recent years, investigators have developed catalysts that break the resistant double bond between carbon and oxygen in carbon dioxide. And this is the first step actually in creating solar refineries that produce useful compounds from the waste gas, including platform molecules that can serve as raw materials for the synthesis of such varied products as medicines, detergents, fertilizers, and textiles. So my concern at this moment is more towards the medicines, because medicines, the chemicals used in medicines are of very different type actually, and they require very high controlled environment, actually very tightly controlled environment for their manufacture. So sun powered chemistry can play a very big role there. Okay, and development of new catalysts that work under abundant and benign visible light is a major objective here. Okay, this is another technology which is directly related to the healthcare industry, and that is the virtual patient. See, those who have tracked the approvals for COVID vaccine, and they might have got the means they quite often they might have heard this news: emergency use authorization, phase 1 trial, phase 2 trial, phase 3 trial. Then you have the emergency use authorization, and so on and so forth. We have to understand that how the medicines and the vaccines, they are allowed to be administered to the people or to the human beings actually. So what happens is, for allowing any medicine to be administered to humans, it undergoes several phases, and these phases are very long periods actually. These are not small, and then they are required to be covered, to be tested on a very large population. So starting from phase 1, where very few people are chosen, up to phase 3 actually, where the population base has to be really a wide base. Lakhs of people are required for testing any medicine or vaccine. And these lakhs of people have to be chosen from different castes, different ethnicities, different regions, different gender, and different age group, and so on and so forth. So that's a very difficult challenge. And the best example here is the COVID vaccine, which is still not allowed to be administered to people below 18 in most of the countries, including India. So what is virtual patients? Actually, in virtual patients, we replace the humans with simulations actually, and it can make clinical trials faster and very safe, because once a person is under trial, any medicine is administered to a person under trial phase, actually he is all these difficulties, all the difficulties or the side effects or the ill effects he can face, they are all explained to him. Now there is every possibility that the things may go out of control and the person may eventually die. So that's a quite risky proportion, though the possibility of such deaths are very rare, because a lot of procedures go before any medicine is administered to humans. But still the possibilities are non-zero probability. Okay, so for that to be avoided completely, what they want is that up to phase 3 trials, they want to avoid the use of humans as the subjects for the trial. So the virtual patients are basically for that a human body can be simulated, and the effect of any medicine can be studied on this simulated human body. That's what the purpose and the virtual patients. So every day it seems some new algorithm enables computers to diagnose a disease with unprecedented accuracy, renewing predictions that computers will soon replace doctors. Now that may not happen. I'm not very hopeful of that becoming a reality, but still, if virtual patients can become a reality, it is possible to make the just give me a minute actually. There is a call actually, let me take this call. नहीं मैं कर लूंगा, तो कोई बात नहीं आपसे तो, है ना? ओके, ठीक है, ठीक है, ठीक है, थैंक यू, थैंक यू। Okay, sorry for interruption actually. So the question is, what if computers could replace patients as well? That is where we require actually. The focus has now shifted. The earlier focus was replacing a doctor with a computer. Now, no. It's the other way around, that what they are trying to do is that can a patient be replaced with a computer, and so patient can be used as a computer can be used as a patient for clinical trials and vaccines for trials for vaccines and medicines. So if virtual humans could have replaced real people in some stages of a coronavirus vaccine trial, for instance, it could have sped development of preventive tool and slowed down the pandemic. That's the kind of impact. And it's not that it has not happened. In certain portions, say what is genome sequencing, that is, and what we have the fields of like biomedicines and what we call as the what is that bioinformatics, and all these fields, they are basically they are working to realize this particular dream. Okay, so what happens here is the potential vaccines that were not likely to work could have been identified early. See, what happens is development of vaccines is a very long drawn process. Okay, so it starts with the genome sequencing of the virus, and then finding which kind of protein it has, and then which kind of protein will destroy this protein, and so on and so forth. Now, and then there are mutations also. So you need to address these mutations also, that what are the possible mutations. If you do not have the sufficient computing powers, then identifying these mutations become very difficult. So what happens is that even if a vaccine is developed, you will require a redevelopment. So basically, we are trying to imagine a situation where not only the patients, but the viruses can also be simulated. Okay, so you have the potential vaccine that were not likely to, and any candidate which is unlikely to work, that can be identified early and thrown away. So we do not waste the effort on that. So slashing trial cost, it will reduce the trial cost, and avoiding testing poor vaccine candidates on living volunteers. Okay. Now, these are some of the benefits in silico medicine, as they call it, or the testing of drugs and treatments on virtual organs or body treatments. In fact, virtual patients, it's not that the full human body. Actually, you may have, say, trying to address the ailments of kidney, then you can simulate kidney. That is also a virtual patient, and then see how any medicine behaves on kidney. Actually. So body systems to predict how a real person will respond to the therapies, and for the foreseeable future, real patients will be needed in late stage studies, but in silico trials will make it possible to conduct quick and inexpensive first assessments of safety and efficacy, drastically reducing the number of live human subjects required for experimentation. That's the kind of impact it will have. So virtual patients is an important technology for that reason. Okay, now see, virtual patients in particular, when we want to realize, it will require very fast computing power. Okay, and for that, this is one of the technologies which we call as spatial computing is slightly different. We'll come that quantum computing is another aspect. Now, spatial computing is related to the healthcare of the elderly people and disabled people. Actually, that is what we can think of this is. So just understand what is happening here. This is something like we call is the smart home. So basically what we do is we create a digital map or a digital image of the entire home here. So just look at this scenario. Imagine Martha, an octogenarian who lives independently and uses a wheelchair. Okay. And all objects in her home are digitally cataloged. Remember, this is cataloging. All sensors and devices that control objects have been internet enabled. So everything, means even a small object which is there in our home, it has an internet enabled device attached to it. And a digital map of our home has been merged with the object map. So everything is now digitized. So she is living in a digital world. So what happens, just see, as Martha moves from her bedroom to the kitchen, the light switched on and off and the ambient temperature adjusts. The chair will slow if her cat crosses her path. When she reaches the kitchen, the table moves to improve her access to the refrigerator and stove, then moves back when she is ready to eat. Later, if she begins to fall when getting into bed, her furniture is the next step in the ongoing convergence of the physical and digital worlds. So what it, and how it does is, it does everything virtual reality and augmented reality apps do: digitize objects that connect via the cloud, allow sensors and motors to react to one another, and digitally represent the real world. Just give me a second, actually. Just give me a second. Okay, so that's basically the health related to healthcare and of elderly people, the people with the special abilities, and so on and so forth. And how it does is that actually you have the digital mapping and digital digitization of everything, and then it combines these capabilities with high fidelity spatial mapping to enable a computer coordinator to track and control the movements and interaction of objects as a person navigates through the or physical world. So when you are moving from your home, you simultaneously you are moving through your digital home also, and so digital home will take care that your movement in the physical home is free from every hurdle. Okay, this is another technology which we call as the digital medicines, actually. And what these digital medicines are, try to understand it, actually. These are apps that diagnose and even treat what ails us. Remember, these are not physical pills or something like that. No. These are basically the diagnostic tools, actually. And then these diagnostic tools will, they are connected to the other systems on your body. Say, if your sugar level has fallen, it will inject some sugar into your body. That's the kind of impact actually it's have, the kind of arrangement it has. So a raft of apps in use or under development can now detect or monitor mental and physical disorders autonomously and directly administer the therapies. That is where that's why they are called the digital medicines. So collectively known as digital medicines, the software can both enhance traditional medical care and support patients when access to healthcare is limited, a need that COVID-19 crisis has exacerbated. What has happened actually due to COVID-19, the pressure on healthcare systems and healthcare machinery has increased manifolds, actually. And the doctors, the healthcare workers, the nursing staff, the hospitals, everybody is in very serious pressure, actually. Now, what is required is that if we can have some kind of system which based on your diagnostic results, diagnostics, or the symptoms, can guide a patient that what kind of treatment he can take, then this is the digital medicine. And remember, this project was implemented in UK and it was quite successful and reduced the pressure on the healthcare systems significantly. So detection aids can also take the form of ingestible sensor-bearing pills called micro or bioelectronic devices, which can be swollen as pills, and they'll travel through your body and will give the insight of your body that what is really happening inside your body. So some are being developed to detect things such as cancerous DNA, gases emitted by gut microbes, stomach bleeds, body temperature and oxygen levels, and the sensors relay the data to apps for recording. And many detection aids rely on mobile devices to record such features as user voices, locations, facial expression. Now, these are a kind of, these apps are being worked upon, where based on these actions and the outputs from a human, they try to gauge the mental health of the person. So if the voice is shaking, then yes, there is some difficulty with that person. Locations, facial expressions, exercise, sleep and texting activities, and they are used to gauge and determine the mental health of a person. Then they apply artificial intelligence to flag the possible onset or extraversion of a condition. That's what the digital medicines are. Okay, now COVID-19 had highlighted the importance of digital medicines, and instead of waiting for on hold with a call center or risking a trip to the emergency room, people concerned about experiencing, say, coughing and fever could chat with a bot which used natural language processing to ask about symptoms, and based on AI analysis could describe possible causes or begin a telemedicine session for assessment by a physician, and such interventions greatly reduce the strain on health systems. Okay, electric aviation is another technology. This is related to the climate change actually, and ultimately everything affects the human health. So that's why this technology is also important for the health industry, or for person to be to stay healthy. Okay, why it's important that just see 2.5% of global carbon emissions is caused by the aviation industry in 19. Okay, currently it may be slightly low because of reduced aviation activities, but it is likely to increase. Okay, now, so what is being attempted is that electric aeroplanes can provide the scale of transformation required. Actually, we want to reduce the carbon footprint of the aviation industry, and for that you require electric airplanes. Remember, some people may argue that electricity in any case is coal fired, but remember now the renewable energies have made a real dent in the prospects of coal-fired power stations, and a large number of countries have already pledged that they will be carbon-free. Their energy would be carbon-free by a particular year. Even India is working very hard to reduce its dependence on coal-fired stations, and we are investing quite heavily in renewable energies. So not only would electric propulsion motors eliminate direct carbon emissions, they could also reduce fuel cost by up to 90%. So that is another economy of this actually. 40% of the aviation industry costs are due to fuel. So once you reduce the cost of the fuel, air travel will be quite cheaper, and then lot many people will be able to afford the air travel, which is not possible as of now. And then maintenance will be reduced by 50%, and noise levels will also be reduced by 70%. So the overall, it's a win-win situation, and the industry is going to win tremendous to get a big boost if electric propulsion systems for aircraft become reality. And electric motors generally have longer life spans than the hydrocarbon fueled engines in current aircraft. They need an overhaul at 20,000 hours versus 2,000. So that's how the costs will be reduced. And then the number of parts, or the number of what they call as the moving parts, are also very low in electric aviation systems in comparison to the what we call as the gas or the petrol fired engines. So that will reduce the maintenance cost significantly, reduces operational expenses considerably. So, but the problem is that today's best batteries put far less power by weight than traditional fuels. Actually, that is where the whole issue is, that the dead weight of the battery and the dead weight of the fuel or the energy contained within that, this ratio is not in favor of the batteries currently. This is still in favor of the petrol fuels. So an energy density of 250 watt hours per kilogram versus 12,000 watt hours per kilogram for jet fuel. That's what the problem is, that petrol fuels has a 250 watt hours per kilogram, whereas there it's 12,000 watt hours per kilogram. Sorry, this is battery. 250 watt hours is for battery, and 12,000 watt hours per kilogram for the jet fuels which are used currently. The batteries required for a given flight are therefore far heavier than standard fuel and take up more space. So that is the challenge. We need to really address this challenge actually. And for everything to be successful, the batteries are still a big challenge for that. So approximately half of all flights globally are fewer than 800 kilometers, which is expected to be within the range of battery-powered electric aircraft by 2025. Okay, the next is the cement industry. Actually, we call it the lower carbon cement. And see, what is with cement? There is a very serious problem, and there is I don't know whether you agree or you do not agree actually, but generally what happens is development or the pace of development is directly proportional to the construction activities everywhere you see. So economic development or the infrastructure development, what both the things actually, they are directly proportional to the cement consumption, that how much cement we are consuming. Cement and steel are two big parameters actually, which give you a good indication that whether you are moving or you are stagnant. Okay, so if the cement consumption is increasing or the steel consumption is increasing, then we say that yes, economy is moving. Now, with cement, actually, the problem is construction material that combats climate change. Actually, why it happens is the manufacture of cement creates a substantial yet unprecedented, underappreciated amount of human-produced carbon dioxide, up to 8% of the global total, according to the London-based think tank Chatham House. So, the cement is the largest contributor to the global the climate change or the global warming actually by having a very high carbon footprint. Why? Because the emissions from cement production result from the fossil fuels used to generate heat for cement formation, as well as from the chemical process in a kiln that transforms limestone into clinker. So it's both way. It's double the amount actually. So which is then ground and combined with other materials to make the cement. So calcium carbonate is decomposed into calcium oxide and carbon dioxide. Now this carbon dioxide, which is liberated because of the decomposition of limestone, actually, that also gets liberated into atmosphere. And then the fuel which is used to make this decomposition possible, that energy actually, that is coal fired actually. And so there also a lot of carbon dioxide is produced. So total 8% of the carbon dioxide is from the cement industry. So currently 4 billion tons of cement are produced every year, but because of increasing urbanization, that figure is expected to rise to 5 billion tons in the next 30 years. So it has been said that cement production for a country, it would be the third largest emitter after China and the US. That's the impact actually, and that's the kind of danger we have with the cement industry. So what people are doing actually is that they are working on some solution to this problem. So what are those possible solutions which have been thought? Researchers have been incorporating bacteria into concrete formulations to absorb carbon dioxide from air and to improve its properties. So carbon dioxide is absorbed from the oxygen, and then it is that bacteria gets its food from the carbon dioxide absorbed from the atmosphere. This bacteria is inbuilt into the cement actually. And startups pursuing living building materials include Biomason in Raleigh, North Carolina, which grows cement-like bricks using bacteria and particles called aggregate actually. So what they are doing actually is they are using bacteria, and then this bacteria grows using the atmospheric carbon dioxide and converts into a material which is a brick-like material. Okay. So in another innovation funded by Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency and published in February in the journal Matter, researchers at the University of Colorado, Boulder, employed photosynthetic microbes called cyanobacteria to build a lower carbon concrete. That's what the requirement is. And so they inoculated a sand hydrogel scaffold with bacteria to create bricks with an ability to self-heal the cracks. Okay, Quantum computing and quantum sensing, that is another very, very important aspect actually. So, and quantum sensing actually, in particular for healthcare industry, is very, very important. So why these are very, very high accuracy metrology based on peculiars of subatomic realms. Quantum sensors could be transformative, enabling autonomous vehicles that can see around corners, underwater navigation systems, early warning systems for volcanic activities and earthquakes, and portable scanners that monitor a person's brain activity during daily life. So that's how the scanners are being built for monitoring the brain activity of the humans actually. And so quantum sensors reach extreme levels of precision by exploiting the quantum nature of matter, using the difference between, for example, electrons in different energy states as a base unit. Other quantum sensors use atomic transition to detect minuscule changes in motion and tiny differences in gravitational, electric, and magnetic fields. So what happens is actually the quantum sensing is expected to be used for detecting the what they call is the biomechanic changes in the human body. So suppose your particularly the onset of Parkinson and Alzheimer's actually, that can be detected early, and with the quantum sensing, and can be cured in initial stages and in early stages, rather than waiting the disease to be fully visible. So there are certain case studies actually. The University of Birmingham in UK are working to develop free-falling supercooled atoms to detect tiny changes in local gravity. And this kind of quantum gravimeter could be capable of detecting buried pipes, cables, and these are engineering applications. But the biomechanic applications are also being developed through quantum sensing. So seafaring ships could use similar technology to detect underwater objects. Quantum systems remain extremely susceptible to disturbance, which could limit their application to control environments. Okay, green hydrogen, that is a fuel actually. That's more a fuel technology. Basically, hydrogen needs to be generated for use as a fuel using the hydrolysis process actually. Okay, so when hydrogen burns, the only byproduct is water, which is why hydrogen has been an alluring zero carbon energy source for decades actually. So yet the traditional process of producing hydrogen, in which fossil fuels are exposed to steam, is not even remotely zero carbon, because hydrogen produced in this way is called gray hydrogen. If the CO2 is captured and sequestered, it is called the blue hydrogen. It's still not a green hydrogen, because here the energy used to generate hydrogen is from the fossil fuels like coal, etc. But in green hydrogen is different. It is produced through electrolysis, in which machines split water into hydrogen and oxygen with no other byproducts. Okay, and here, because now we are assuming, or we are contemplating, that renewable energy will be available in abundance actually. Hydrolysis is possible. Otherwise, hydrolysis requires a lot of energy, and electrolysis requires a lot of energy, and that's why it was not being thought. But now with the cheap energy is being available, electrolysis is being thought of, and you have plenty of seawater available, so it can produce a lot of hydrogen. That's why it's called a green hydrogen. So historically, electrolysis required so much electricity that it made little sense to produce hydrogen that way. But the situation is changing for two reasons. First, significant amounts of excess renewable electricity have become available at grid scale. Rather than storing excess electricity in arrays of batteries, the extra electricity can be used to drive the electrolysis of water, storing the electricity in the form of hydrogen. And the second is electrolyzers are becoming more and more efficient. And the prediction is actually that the current renewable technologies can decarbonize the energy sector by as much as 85% by replacing gas and coal with clean electricity. That's what the prediction is actually. And once that becomes reality, green hydrogen can also become a reality. So green hydrogen has potential to supply energy to areas requiring fuel that is high energy density or heat at high temperatures, such as shipping and manufacturing. So there also it is possible that hydrogen can replace the fossil fuels of today. This is the another technology directly related to the medical science actually, and that is the whole genome synthesis. So particularly for development of vaccines at a very fast pace, this technology is very, very important. In fact, even for medicines also it is important, but particularly for vaccines, it's very, very important. How? Early in the COVID-19 pandemic, scientists in China uploaded the virus genetic sequence, the blueprint for its production to generate genetic databases. And then a Swiss group then synthesized the entire genome and produced the virus from it. So it's a digital form of the virus actually. Essentially teleporting the virus into their laboratory for study without having to wait for physical samples. So that's how the virus was transported from China to Switzerland for the purpose of development of vaccine actually. And such a speed is one example of how whole genome printing is advancing medicine and other endeavors. And so whole genome synthesis is an extension of the booming field of synthetic biology. Researchers use software to design genetic sequences that they produce and introduce into a microbe, thereby reprogramming the microbe to do the desired work, such as making a new medicine. Genome sequencing so far get light edits, but improvements in synthesis technology and software are making it possible to print ever larger swaths of genetic material and to alter genomes more extensively. So even mutations can be studied through genome synthesis. So whole genome engineering could be misused. That is another problem actually, and we need to work on ensuring that it's not misused by the people actually. And the biggest fear is with the chief fear being the weaponized pathogens or their toxin generating components. So scientists and engineers will need to devise comprehensive biological security filter, a set of existing and novel technologies able to detect and monitor the spread of new threats in real time. And investigators will need to invent testing strategies that can scale rapidly. Critically, governments around the world must cooperate much more than they do now. Okay. So that's what the technologies I wanted to discuss actually. This is another part of it actually, and this is for the digital world actually. So let me just conclude it. So what we have discussed is actually, we have discussed the 10 most futuristic technology required for achieving the sustainable development goals. Remember, in sustainable goals, a very high degree of emphasis is paid and is being made on healthcare and that to affordable healthcare they are talking, and good health. They call it the well-being actually. And so overall trends show the overwhelming potential of emerging technologies to help us improve the state of the world. So emerging economies are not just using technology to catch up with more developed countries or to access existing products and services, but in some cases, say in India, the unified payment interface, which we call as UPI, that is a technology actually which has reduced the contact and ultimately helping the to fight the COVID actually. So that's it actually for me from my side. If you have questions, I open the session for questions now. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, sir, for such an informative session. Before I thanks for addressing this session, I invite all the participants for queries, if any, please.
You have talked about all the aspect of emerging technology, but you haven't mentioned about the IoT. Why it is not there? It is missing, I guess.
No. Actually, see, what we need to understand is that in these technologies, wherever you require, say, sensing actually. So IoT basically, you will require.
You have talked about genome sensing, so there's no such type of sensors is involved with there. And genome
That's what
sensing
I'm
is a
talking
very
actually. I have my emphasis here has been to expose or to discuss the technologies and leave it to the researchers to find that where they can use the other technologies to realize these goals actually. Say virtual patients. Now virtual patient as of now, once you have created a virtual patient, at the end of the day when the same medicine is administered to the humans, you will require a lot of sensors there. So development of such sensors have to be a part of the side-by-side efforts which we need to understand. Just give me a second.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
More questions? I think there are no more questions. So I thank on behalf of my college and the organizing committee, CP Gupta, for joining and addressing this session. You always have been very informative. I have been listening to you since more than 2 decades, and every time I find something new in your talks. So, as you were telling that those who have attended previously, so there might be some repetition, but repetition was very less. Because I very well remember that in your previous session, which I listened, was more about smart irrigation, package checking, noise monitoring, etc. The concept of virtual patients, micro needles, electronic aviations, and this quantum sensing, these all are new in your this addressal, and you always add up something new dimensions in the thought process. In fact, not this is not only about engineering and all. It is about the thought process. So what I feel is that you always add something, a new dimension, new horizon in the thought process of the listeners. So that is the key point I can identify in your talks. So thank you very much, sir, for joining us, for addressing us, for motivating, guiding us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It has always been a pleasure to join you people to share my whatever knowledge I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you all the participants for joining. In next session, we'll meet according to the schedule floated earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.